The desert wind carried more than dust that morning when Samuel McKinnon found her beside the old fence line that marked the boundary of his ranch. She sat there like a broken bird with her knees drawn up to her chest and her blonde hair hanging in tangles around her face that bore the marks of someone who had seen too much cruelty in too few years. Samuel had been riding his land for 37 years, and in all that time he had learned to read the signs that nature left behind. But nothing had prepared him for the pain he saw written in this young woman's posture. His horse Copper nickered softly as if sensing the delicate nature of what lay ahead, and Samuel dismounted slowly, his weathered hands steady on the reins despite the uncertainty that filled his chest. The woman looked up at his approach, and Samuel saw fear flash across her features like lightning. "Before a storm, don't touch me there," she whispered, and her voice carried a tremor that spoke of wounds far deeper than any he could see. Samuel stopped where he stood, understanding instinctively that this moment required more wisdom than he had ever needed before. He lowered himself to sit cross-legged on the dusty ground still several feet away, and placed his hat beside him, in a gesture as old as the hills themselves. "My name's Samuel," he said quietly, and his voice carried the same gentle tone he used when approaching spooked cattle. "I own this land, but that don't mean you have to move on if you need a place to rest." The woman studied him with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone who couldn't be more than 25, and Samuel waited with the patience that 4 decades of ranch life had taught him. Time moved differently in the desert, and rushing never improved anything that mattered. The sun climbed higher, and still they sat in that careful distance while Copper grazed nearby, and the only sounds were the whisper of wind through sagebrush and the distant call of a red-tailed hawk. Finally the woman spoke, and her voice was stronger now, though still fragile as morning frost. "My name's Rebecca, and I've been walking for 3 days." Samuel nodded as if this made perfect sense, though his heart ached to think of anyone, especially someone so clearly wounded, making such a journey alone. "Walking can be good medicine," he said, and meant it. Sometimes a person needs to put distance between themselves and whatever was hurting them. Rebecca looked at him with something that might have been surprise. Most folks would ask why I was walking or where I came from. Samuel picked up a small stone and turned it over in his palm. Most folks ask too many questions before they're ready to hear the answers. The wisdom in those words seemed to settle something in Rebecca. And for the first time since he had found her, Samuel saw her shoulders relax just slightly. "I got water in my saddlebags," he offered. "And there's a creek about a 1/4 mile that way if you'd prefer." Rebecca considered this, and Samuel could see her weighing trust against need. The need won, as it often does when someone has been traveling hard. "I'd be grateful for some water," she said. Samuel rose slowly and retrieved his canteen, moving with deliberate care to show he meant no harm. He set it down halfway between them and returned to his spot. The afternoon passed in this careful dance of small kindnesses, and Rebecca began to share pieces of her story, like someone doling out precious coins. She had worked as a seamstress in a town 2 days' ride east until the man's advances became more than she could bear, and his threats made staying impossible. Samuel listened without judgment, knowing that sometimes the greatest gift one person could give another was simply bearing witness to their truth. When the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Samuel faced a decision that would change both their lives. "I got a bunkhouse that ain't been used since my last hired hand moved on to Montana," he said carefully. "It ain't much, but it has a good stove and a door that locks from the inside." Rebecca looked at him for a long moment, and Samuel held his breath. "Why would you help someone you don't know?" Samuel had asked himself the same question, and the answer had come to him as naturally as breathing. "Because somebody helped me once when I needed it most, and because kindness is about the only thing that multiplies when you give it away." That evening, Rebecca followed Samuel at a respectful distance as he led Copper toward the cluster of buildings that made up the heart of his ranch. The main house sat solid and welcoming, with smoke rising from its chimney and warm light glowing in the windows. The bunkhouse stood 20 yards away, offering privacy while still being close enough for safety. Samuel showed her the simple but clean quarters with its narrow bed and small table, and the pot-bellied stove that would keep the desert chill at bay. "There's soap and clean towels in that chest," he said, pointing to a wooden box beneath the window. "And I always keep extra blankets in case the nights turn cold." Rebecca nodded, and Samuel could see her taking in every detail as if memorizing an escape route. "He'll be in the main house if you need anything, but I won't disturb." As Samuel walked back to his own home, he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a familiar coat. He had taken in strays before, horses mostly, and the occasional injured coyote, but never another human being. The next few weeks passed with the rhythm of careful accommodation. Samuel went about his daily routine of tending cattle and mending fences while Rebecca found small ways to contribute. She swept the front porch of the main house and gathered eggs from the chickens, and gradually began to emerge from the shell of fear that had surrounded her when he first found her. They spoke little at first, but the conversations grew longer as trust built between them. Rebecca proved to have a quick mind and a dry sense of humor that reminded Samuel of his late wife Martha, who had passed 5 years earlier, one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Rebecca asked the question that had been hanging between them: "Why ain't you married, Samuel?" The question came so suddenly that Samuel nearly choked on his coffee. "I was married," he said quietly. "Martha and I had 30 good years together before the fever took her." Rebecca absorbed this information with the careful attention she gave to everything. "Do you miss her?" Samuel set down his cup and considered the question with the thoroughness it deserved. "Every single day, but not in a way that hurts anymore. Now it's more like carrying something precious in your pocket. You know it's there and it makes you feel connected to something good." As autumn deepened into winter, Rebecca began to heal in ways that went beyond the physical. Her laughter returned, first in small chuckles at copper antics, and then in full-throated appreciation of Samuel's dry observations about ranch life. She started helping with the cooking and proved to have a talent for making even simple ingredients taste special. More importantly, she began to trust that kindness could exist without expectation or demand. One cold December morning, Samuel found Rebecca in the barn tending to a pregnant mare who was having difficulty with her labor. Her hands were gentle but sure as she helped guide the foal into the world, and Samuel realized that healing had become a two-way street. The mare had chosen to trust Rebecca just as Rebecca was learning to trust again. When the foal finally arrived, healthy and strong, Rebecca looked up at Samuel with tears of joy streaming down her face. "Life keeps going," she said wonderingly. "Even when everything seems hopeless, life keeps finding a way." Samuel nodded, understanding that she was talking about more than just the birth of a horse. By spring, Rebecca had transformed from a frightened woman into someone who moved with quiet confidence around the ranch. She had claimed the bunkhouse as truly hers, filling it with wildflowers and handmade curtains. More importantly, she had begun to speak of the future as something worth planning for, rather than something to be endured. One warm May evening, as they sat on the porch watching the first stars appear, Samuel broached a subject that had been on his mind for weeks. "I've been thinking about expanding the vegetable garden," he said casually. "Could use someone with good hands to help plan it out." Rebecca looked at him sideways, her eyes dancing with amusement. "Samuel McKinnon, are you offering me a permanent job?" Samuel felt heat rise in his cheeks but pressed on. "I'm offering you whatever you want, Rebecca. If that's a job working the land, then yes. If it's partnership in building something good, then that's fine too. And if it's just friendship and a safe place to figure out what's next, then that works as well." Rebecca was quiet for so long that Samuel began to worry he had overstepped. Then she reached over and placed her hand briefly on his arm. "I never thought I'd trust anyone enough to build something with them again," she said softly. "But I think maybe that's exactly what we've been doing all along." The ranch prospered under their joint care. Rebecca expanded the garden into something that fed not just them but several families in the nearest town. Samuel found that having someone to share the daily rhythms of ranch life brought back a contentment he had forgotten was possible. They never spoke of love in the conventional sense, but their partnership grew into something deeper than romance. It became a foundation built on mutual respect and shared values, and the understanding that sometimes the most profound connections grow slowly, like the deep roots of desert plants that can survive anything. Years passed, and visitors to the McKinnon Ranch often remarked on the obvious contentment of its owners. Samuel had gained laugh lines around his eyes, and Rebecca had developed the confident bearing of someone who knew her own worth. They worked together with the easy coordination of long practice, and when troubles came, as they always do, they faced them as a unify.